My brothers and sisters in Christ, as you get to know me better as the rector of the Co-Cathedral of the Sacred Heart, you'll learn that I am a huge and avid sports fan. And in fact, you'll find a pattern of analogies and experiences, images from sports getting into my reflections. I can't help it. It's my nature. I grew up as a baseball player, and while I'm well past my ball-playing days, I am still an avid fan. And I can't help but call to mind a turn of phrase that exists in the baseball world. Right now, Major League Baseball is back, thanks be to God, even in the midst of the pandemic, although it's very unnatural in its form, the abridged season, the empty stadiums, and the like. Right now, we're only a few games into the season, and yet there's only a few to go. But if this were a normal year, right now we'd be in the middle of what we call the dog days of August. It's that part of the schedule in which spring training seems like a long time ago. That time when everyone's bodies were fresh, the weather was mild, optimism was abounding, and now months later, it's really hot. And it's sapping the life out of the players and teams. Every part of the body aches and hurts. And it's in the middle of the season. By September, everyone kind of rejuvenates for the final push towards the postseason. And of course, in October, the chase for glory motivates even the laziest of heart. And yet August is so tiring. Now, this idea of the dog days of August, we can take very literally when we live in a climate such as this. There's some days it's just so hot, we can't find the motivation to move. And yet, this is also true in the spiritual life. I invite you to read more in my rector's letter this week, but this is a time when it's apt to reflect on the sin of sloth, or also known as sloth, depending on which pronunciation you want to use. Another word in the spiritual tradition for this is acedia. And a lot of times we dismiss this amongst the various mortal sins, the capital sins, the deadly sins, because we think that it just means boredom. And after all, who could ever find themselves bored with so many things to worry about? And yet, this sin of sloth is not about boredom or inactivity. In fact, sometimes it's worst when we're at our busiest. What it describes, especially in the spiritual life, is an aimlessness, a distaste for activities. When we find ourselves unable to motivate ourselves to pray, to do anything, to follow through on our commitments. When we just move but don't seem to accomplish anything. Much as often we can find ourselves with free time and waste hours on end without accomplishing anything as we just scroll on our phones, watch TV, surf the internet, and we come off of a day off, a weekend, or even a vacation feeling tired because we didn't even recreate well and intentionally. In the spiritual life, this can be deadly because these are the times when we find ourselves with a distaste for things of God. We don't see the purpose in praying. We don't see the need to go to Mass. We find ourselves bored, distracted, dry. And yet, this is what, in the monastic tradition, the monks called the noonday devil, following after the pattern of Psalm 91, that temptation by the enemy in the middle of something, whether a baseball season, whether our life, whether an activity. The noonday devil tries to move us aside from following through with something to its fruitful end. It means we're on the right path, and the enemy doesn't want us to see it through. In the spiritual life, this can be very dangerous. It can lead us to give up on the very things that feed us, that nourish us, that give us life. Therefore, when we examine and find that we have this present in our life, this acedia, this sloth, it's important to counteract it very intentionally, with intentional prayer or a renewed activity. It can even be very modest. It doesn't have to be drastic, but the point is we counter it with intentionality. Psalm 41 says, "As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longs for you, O God." May we not fall asleep at the wheel in the dog days of summer or the spiritual life, but may we go to the fount of God and fulfill every thirst. May God bless you all.